Arsenal held to a frustrating draw at the Cottage. We can't afford to keep slipping up. We'll discuss the team's struggles to create from open play, debate whether Mikel Arteta got his team selection right, analyse the goal we conceded. It looked far too easy for Marco Silva's side, and more on this episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the pod. Hope you're all having a good Monday so far. It could have been a much better Monday had we got the result that we were all hoping for and we were all desperate for. In the end, it wasn't to be. In the end, it wasn't the case. So, yeah, I'm not going to lie. I'm feeling a little bit downbeat. Normally, when I do the kind of match day reaction pod over on our Patreon side of things, I'm kind of really emotionally charged, and you probably get a slightly different reaction, or at least more extreme reaction, whether that be one way or the other. I'm either over the moon buzzing because we managed to win the game, or I'm sort of really down in the dumps because I'm still coping with the immediate aftermath of a really sort of disappointing event. This time I feel like I've gone the other way. Like, I feel like I'm more frustrated today than I was initially after the game. And I'll explain a little bit about why as we go through today's pod. But at the moment, I just don't feel like we're good enough to win the title, guys. That's kind of my top line. Like, you can sit here and you can make excuses and you can talk about the players missing. And I think from a defensive standpoint, there's certainly a case to be made there. We've talked a lot recently about the lack of sharpness in attack, the fact that we've been a little bit blunt in the final third. And we've also talked about the defense slacking off a little bit. I think with the defense, though, there's an explanation, right? There's an understanding as to why that is the case. You've got so many players out missing. White's out, Tomiyasu's out, Gabriel's out, Calafiori's out, Zinchenko's out as well. So when it comes to the defense, I think there is an explanation, and that explanation is a valid one, and you can kind of tolerate the drop off as a result of that. You're without your best centre back, you're without your first choice left back, you're going to have problems, right? You're not going to be the same side that you are when everybody's fit and available. And I think that really showed in the goal that we conceded, and we'll come on to analyze that one a little bit later on. My bigger concern, though, is going the other way, because we look really blunt in attack. And there's a lot of players that have failed to reach the heights that they did last season. There's a lot of players who consistently fail to deliver in Arsenal's front line right now. And as a result of that, we are over reliant on one man. And any manager, worth his salt in the Premier League knows who that man is, and knows that if they put great emphasis on shutting him down and stopping him, it's not always possible because he's that good. And I'm talking about Bukayo Saka. But they know that if they shut Arsenal down on their right-hand side, they're probably going to be in the game, and they have the platform then to go on and be successful, whether that be by taking all 3 points or simply taking a point from us. And I think, you saw Marco Silva do a shutdown job on Arsenal's right-hand side yesterday. And I talked about him in the lead up to the game. I talked about him as being a really tactically flexible manager, someone who has his ideals in terms of the way that he wants his team to play, but also is, I think, humble enough to know that he doesn't have the greatest players around, and that his team have a certain ceiling and have a certain level. And if he needs to change it up, if he needs to focus on one particular aspect of the game that he believes is going to give his side the greatest chance of earning a result, he's going to do it. We've seen him at points this season drop Emile Smith-Rowe, for example, who we would all say is too good to not be in the Fulham starting 11. He'll drop him. If he feels that's the way to go, he'll drop him and he'll play, for example, Andreas Pereira like he did up at Manchester City. So I warned you guys in the preview show about Marco Silva's flexibility, about the humbleness, and about the fact that for me, he's one of the most difficult managers in the Premier League to outthink. I think he's really, really good. I guess we should start with the lineup, with the 11. Was Arteta right to shuffle the pack? Could Kieran Tierney, for example, or Miles Lewis-Skelly, who was back available again, have played maybe at left back to cope with the defensive injuries? And then we wouldn't have had to disrupt the midfield by putting Partey in at right back and bringing Jorginho in. or we wouldn't have had to move Timber over to the other side. Personally, I don't have too much of a problem, by the way, with Jorginho playing, because I think Jorginho, when he's played, has been very, very good. And yesterday we had our issues and we had our struggles. I don't put any of it down to Jorginho. So let me make that clear. I'm not scapegoating him. I don't think that's fair. I do think, and I've said this before on the pod, those of you that listen regularly will know this, that Timber, when he plays on the left, is not as complete a player. Defensively, he's good and he can shut you down. And when we play against the better teams, I don't have an issue with him playing in that position, because I think defensively, 1v1, he's one of the best in the business. The problem is that watching him on the right side, we've kind of come to learn that actually Jurrien Timber is a lot more of a complete player. He can impact the game going forward. He can support Saka. He can link up with Martin Odegaard. And all of a sudden, his level's gone up. Take him out of the right side, put him on the left side, and you take away a big part of his game. I think also yesterday we were clearly asking him to go and invert, which again, I've said in the past, I don't think particularly works for Jurrien Timber. I don't think it suits him. And I think he struggles as a result of that. And again, not scapegoating another player. This is not me having a go at Timber. What my question is here, and what the topic of debate should be, is, was Mikel Arteta right to shuffle the pack as much as he did? I'm a big believer in the fact that you should disrupt as few positions as you possibly can. Selection headache, issues, okay, unless the player that you'd be bringing in is really significantly weaker, then I don't think you should then mess around with other positions to try and find a solution. I think you want to try and keep some form of consistency in the lineup, and I think you want to further develop some of those relationships. That Timber Odegaard Saka relationship is flourished over the last few weeks. It's looked really, really good. And to take one of those key components out of that, to go and put them on the left-hand side where they have no relationship with, for instance, Leandro Trossard, who was playing on the left-hand side, and with Declan Rice, who's playing on the kind of left-hand side of your midfield, you're then disrupting multiple areas of the pitch. And it's easy to say with hindsight, because I did float the idea in the preview show of maybe Partey going in at right back. But I think in hindsight, it was the wrong decision. I think in hindsight, we unbalanced and unsettled the team more than we needed to, because we were worried about throwing a Kieran Tierney or a Miles Lewis-Skelly in at left back. I just wonder, had Zinchenko been fit, would Mikel Arteta have gone the same way he did against Manchester United? Maybe, but it was clear, in the second half against Manchester United, that he feared consequences of Zinchenko's defensive fragility, and he took him off. As soon as he got skinned by Amad Diallo and went on a yellow card, he was off, gone, hooked. So Mikel Arteta doesn't fully trust him, clearly, from a defensive point of view. I don't know if he would have trusted him to start at Fulham, or if he would have tried to find an alternative, or if he would have played the way that he did anyway had Zinchenko been available. But I just think the more positions you disrupt, the more you impact the flow and the rhythm of the team. And I think with hindsight, Mikel Arteta was probably wrong to do that. I do want to focus in on the goal that we conceded. I do want to analyze it. I think it came about because we were asking Timber partly to do what he doesn't really want to do, which is go into those more kind of central areas and drift in as a kind of inverted player. Zinchenko, really confident in doing that. He loves doing it. But when it comes to Jurrien Timber, I just don't think is his game. So if we have a look at this goal, for those of you listening on audio, I'm going to explain it as best as I can. For those of you watching on the video, I'm going to show you some images now and some screenshots to kind of demonstrate the points that I want to make. But let me just try and share this with you. Bear with me a second. Let me just have a go with the technology. Here we go. So what you can see here is you can see Fulham looking to break away, and you can see that Jurrien Timber is in a position where he's obviously gone infield to invert. Here he is. And as soon as the turnover happens, he knows that he's got to get back into that left back position. Essentially, he wants to come into this type of area, Jurrien Timber, and he wants to try and deal with Kenny Tete. The problem is that he looks over to his left-hand side, Jurrien Timber, and he can see that Raul Jimenez is already on his bike. He's already making a run, and Jakub Kiwior now has to contend with him. And the whole Arsenal defence has to be on red alert here. Jorginho is in that sixth position in the middle of the park. We know he hasn't got the pace necessarily to get back. Saliba has to be mindful now of Jimenez's run. Is he going to try and come inside Kiwior, go on his blind side, in which case Saliba would have to take over. Partey playing at right back, again, not a natural right back, has to be aware of Adama Traore on the outside of him, who's got incredible pace, and you don't want to get in a sprint with him. So, this turnover happens and Arsenal have to try and get back into shape as quickly as possible. Arsenal under Mikel Arteta generally have been really, really good at doing this. They've been generally really, really good at getting back behind the ball nice and quickly in these types of scenarios. But it doesn't quite work out like that on this occasion. And you got to give Fulham immense credit here. You got to give Raul Jimenez a lot of credit, because he started making the run out towards the right-hand side. And just as Tete looks up and is about to make the pass, you can see that Raul Jimenez here just makes a little dart on the inside of Jakub Kiwior. Have a look at that there. He just changes direction. Kiwior's already committed to trying to show him on the outside, but you can see his body shape. He's about to launch himself into a run in another direction, and that causes Jakub Kiwior all sorts of issues. If I take it on just a little bit further, you'll see exactly what I mean. So Kenny Tete plays the ball into the channel, and now Kiwior has Raul Jimenez on his blind side. You can see it there. He's on his blind side. But what he's done really, really cleverly there, Raul Jimenez, is that as Kenny Tete releases the pass, he's on Kiwior's blind side, but he stays just close enough to him that it's quite a way over for William Saliba to shuffle into. And that's what makes this a really clever run from the Mexican. The pass from Kenny Tete is very, very good as well. The weight on it's great. The angle on it's great. And if we take it on ever so slightly further, Jimenez gets into the position where he's about to take a shot on. Saliba, as you can see here, does eventually come across. He does eventually have to come across and try and bail his teammate out here. But because Jimenez stuck so close to Kiwior, because he didn't go inside too early, he makes it really, really difficult for Saliba to get across in time. And then Raul Jimenez fires an arrow into the bottom corner. It's some finish from the Mexican. It really, really is. Raya could do nothing about it, in fairness. But it's a clever run. It's a clever pass. I just think that if I take it right back to the beginning of this move, of this scenario, had it been Gabriel in this position, had it been Gabriel tasked with covering this entire space here on his own, you trust him to do it, because Gabriel's got that greater athleticism. He's got that power. He's got that ability to move across the ground brilliantly. And I do feel like, this is an example of where Kiwior is weaker than Gabriel. But, I don't want to beat Kiwior up too much about it, because I just think it's one of those things, right? You are a top defender. You get injured. You're unable to play. It's very rare that your replacement is going to be of the same level. It's completely understandable that when you have to shuffle around your defense, when you have to contend with 5 potential first team options being out injured, that the level's going to drop. And so I know a lot of people sort of called out Jakub Kiwior and had a go at him and wanted to single him out for a lot of criticism here. And I do think if it was Gabriel, he probably prevents that from developing into a goal. But at the same time, you got to ask questions of our want for Timber to be going searching in midfield, because if he's not, and he's in a more conventional left back position, even if he's caught slightly further up the pitch, he can make it harder for Kenny Tete to play that pass. He can provide a block. He can provide, an obstacle for Kenny Tete, a second obstacle for him to try and feed the ball around. That reduces the chances of him getting the pass right, which reduces the chances of Raul Jimenez's run coming to anything, which in turn reduces the chances of Fulham scoring a goal. So you see where I'm going with this. Like, I think this is partly because, or the reason we conceded this goal is partly because Kiwior isn't up to the level of Gabriel, but it's also partly because Fulham have exploited a tactical flaw in the way that we use our fullbacks, and they've taken full advantage of that. The rest of the first half performance, I thought, was okay. We were in control for the most part. There were some half chances. On the odd occasion, we'd push our sort of midfielders into those more advanced areas where we get them running from deep. Declan Rice got in there a couple of times. One time he dragged a volley wide, left-footed. There was another one where Saka delivered a ball into the box, and on the stretch, Rice couldn't quite turn it goalwards. But those were the only real moments, I thought, of quality that we showed. They were the only real moments where we threatened to pull Fulham apart. And it became quite apparent during the first half that the only way we were going to open them up was if we started committing those runners from slightly deeper positions. I think Saka had a shot on his right foot that went across Bernd Leno, which he saved comfortably. Every save that Bernd Leno had to make was very, very comfortable. We tried to be proactive from set pieces again. We did score from a set piece in the second half, so you can continue to call us set piece FC if you wish, but we can't be in a place where we're reliant on them. They should be a facet to our game. They should be one of the weapons that we have available to us. They shouldn't be something that we rely upon. What I would refute quite strongly is people saying that Arsenal are going out with the intention of only scoring from set pieces. No. They are struggling to create from open play in the way that we'd like them to. The XG stats are scary bad. I think I read yesterday that we're 13th in the Premier League for open play XG, which is nowhere near acceptable. Let's not sugarcoat it. It's not good enough. But this idea that Arsenal turn up every week with no intention of scoring from open play and actually just focus on set pieces is completely wrong, and it's nonsense. And it feels like that right now because, we're seeing so many of our goals proportionately coming from set pieces. But, it's not an intention, I don't think. I think it's us benefiting from something that we're very, very good at and having to lean on that a little bit while we're not able to produce open play stuff in the way that we have in the past or should be. So we got to halftime, and I think you could argue that it was against the run of play that Fulham scored. I think Fulham came with the intention of playing a mid-block. I think Marco Silva wanted to frustrate first and foremost. I said in the preview show that it was going to be really interesting to see how brave Anthony Robinson was in some of his runs. He wasn't that brave in the first half. He did get forward on a couple of occasions, but generally was quite reserved and conservative. And I think that showed me and told me that, Fulham's priority was to shut us down on our right-hand side, which you do if you was an opposition manager. It makes perfect sense. If we then sort of think about how the game developed, if you score after 11 minutes and your intention was to be predominantly defensive and you were looking to play on the transition, the fact that you've got your noses in front after 11 minutes was the best possible thing that could happen for Marco Silva's side, because no longer do you have that kind of dilemma or quandary as to whether or not you should be pushing that little bit harder. You're at home. Is the emphasis on you? Is the onus on you to go out and try and force the issue? Or do you sort of sit off? The fact that you've got that goal lead and cushion completely justifies the idea of sitting off that little bit more. And it worked for Fulham. It really did. And from then on, it became an Arsenal possession game and a Fulham sort of transition game. That's what they wanted. And to be fair, aside from the one transition they scored from, they didn't create an awful lot. At no point was I really worried about Fulham scoring a second. I didn't ever feel like we were under the cosh. They might have felt like they were under pressure because we had so much of the ball and we had them pinned back for large periods of the game. But I can assure you, if you haven't already, if you watch the game back in full, you're not going to feel anything. And that's the worry. That's the concern. We never looked at any point like we were going to break them down unless it was going to come from a set piece. And that's where the whole set piece FC narrative thing crops up again. We did not do enough with our possession. We had so much of it. I think it was 66, 67% away from home against a side that are doing very, very well in the Premier League. You go there, you have that kind of ball, but you don't make anything of it. And this is the problem that Arsenal have right now. The second half was a bit better. It was a little bit more intense. But seeing us start the second half with that higher level of intensity just begs the question again of why are we starting slow? And we started slow against Manchester United on Wednesday night, and we kind of got away with it because we managed to unlock them from a set piece. That meant they had to come out a little bit more. And then, we started to create a little bit more, but not a great deal, not enough, before we wrapped the game up with what? Yep, another set piece. Set pieces are bailing us out at the minute, but we can't be so reliant on them. I did, however, think that Arsenal had found the winner when Martinelli's cross found Bukayo Saka, who headed home from close range, only for it to be ruled out by VAR. Look, let's be clear, it's clearly the right decision. He was clearly offside. No complaints about that. I will complain a little bit about Martinelli's role in that. I felt that when he came on, he was generally quite wasteful, poor decisions. poor execution of crosses and other things that he was trying to pull off, shots, whatever it might be. And when he puts the delivery in and Bukayo Saka gets onto the end of it and Arsenal wheel away in celebration and everybody's happy and you know that the narrative is going to completely flip the other way. And all of a sudden we go from the team that are blunt in attack are real title contenders because they've got that mentality. That's what the narrative was going to be, right? But you watch that delivery coming from Martinelli. You watch it unfold. You watch Arsenal put the ball in the back of the net and you think, finally, he's made the right decision from his position and he's executed the delivery well enough. That was what I was thinking. But no, he makes a mistake in the build-up. And listen, players can get caught offside. It's not a crime. Like, I won't say that Martinelli is a disgrace or anything like that. I won't be as hyperbolic as some of the reactions I've read on social media about Gabriel Martinelli. But I will say that when you're playing in a wide position like that, you've got far less of an excuse to be caught offside because you're looking right along the line. And if you're a player that's as quick as Martinelli, that has the motor that Gabriel Martinelli has, why do you need to go early? You don't. That's the point. And so when I saw why the goal was ruled out, why the goal was chalked off, I was massively deflated. And I'd gone from being frustrated with Martinelli to being elated with him to being annoyed at him again. And let me be clear, I'm not making Martinelli the scapegoat here. I didn't think Leandro Trossard had much of an impact prior to Martinelli coming on, although I felt like Trossard was starting to do a little bit more and get involved in a little bit more at the point he was hooked. So that substitution at the time didn't make a great deal of sense to me, I've got to be honest. But yeah, we talked right at the top of the pod about the attack, how blunt it is right now. And I think, look, people are picking on Martinelli from what I've read on socials. People are going after Kai Havertz again. It feels like those two are the go-to pair when it comes to trying to find a scapegoat. Arsenal always have to have a scapegoat, it seems. But I think we need to focus on the attack as a collective. Leandro Trossard has been nowhere near as effective as he was last season. Jesus and Sterling are supposed to provide alternatives, are supposed to carry some of the attacking burden, whether that be from the bench, whether that be in the shape of us rotating. None of them have had any impact so far this season. None of them. So now, rather than focusing on Havertz, who maybe isn't as impactful as he was last season, granted, I'd give you that, or Martinelli, who's been struggling for a little while now, let's look at the attack as a collective. Of the forward players that we have at our disposal, the only one that you can rely on turning up every week and giving you a certain level of performance right now is Bukayo Saka. We are far too reliant on him. And that's partly because he's brilliant. And I've said it before, the better a player is, the more naturally reliant you become on them and the more difficult it is to replace them. And so when people say, oh, well, you know, you're over-reliant on Odegaard, for instance, well, he's that damn good that if he's missing, you're going to miss him. That's how it goes, right? But I feel like you can point at Martinelli, you can point at Havertz. Sterling has offered nothing since he's come to Arsenal, zero zilch, which is really frustrating because I thought that that was a semi-decent signing at the time because I thought that he would be able to provide the odd moment here and there. Don't know why he's not getting on the pitch. I don't know if that's a Mikel Arteta thing. I don't know if he doesn't, doesn't fancy him right now. I don't know if he watches him in training and feels like he's not quite at the level. I don't know what it is. Arteta talked him up the other day and said he wants to give him more minutes and that will be the intention. But right now, as of, the 9th of December, 2024, I can sit here and comfortably say that he's had very little, if any, impact at all since coming to Arsenal. Gabriel Jesus is continuing to struggle every time he comes on, whether he gets an odd start here and there or whether he comes off the bench, he offers zero at the minute. And that is worrying. So rather than focus on any one individual, I think we need to look at the attack as a collective. It isn't firing at the level that we need it to. We need to address that in January, whether that be in the shape of bringing in another centre forward or whether that be we go out and get a winger who is of a higher standard and of a higher level than Martinelli or Trossard. Trossard's been very impactful for Arsenal generally, but it's predominantly been off the bench. And when he starts games, I never quite fancy him. And when Martinelli starts games and makes bad decisions repeatedly, I then start to question whether I was right to say that Trossard shouldn't be in the 11 and that Martinelli should start ahead of him. So the truth is I'm not set on either of them. And there's another guy waiting in the wings in Raheem Sterling who could potentially make that position his own, but he's had zero impact. What justification would Mikel Arteta have right now for throwing him in? Jesus is giving us nothing either. So the attack as a collective is a big, big problem. Look, I genuinely don't feel that right now, as we're recording this, we're at the level required to go on and win the Premier League title. You know, any hope that we do have, a little bit of hope that's in the back of your head, that the most positive of Arsenal fans right now want to project, and I class myself as one of those, generally speaking, it's based on what you saw last season. It's not based on what you've seen this season. There's no evidence this season to say that we're good enough to do it. We went on an incredible run in the second half of last season. Unfortunately for us, it wasn't enough. But that history tells us that this team is capable of going on that type of run, which keeps you believing just a little bit that if Liverpool drop off, which could happen, that if Chelsea drop off, which could happen, massive result for them again yesterday, by the way, that we will be there to take advantage. But are you confident in saying that? I'm not based on the performances that we've seen so far this season. Any hope that we have is based on our recent history rather than what the eye test is showing us and throwing up for us right now. I got to say as well, like, I feel like we go into these conversations after these sort of disappointing results and it all becomes very binary, right? Either back the team unequivocally or we're crap. Like, there's no in between. There's no nuance to the conversation. That drives me mad. I've seen a lot of people saying that we're completely blunt in attack and we've got nothing, and as a result, we're not going to achieve anything. On the other side, I've got people saying that we were dominant, and I hate that term. I hate that phrase, and I'll explain why. I hate it because it paints a false picture. Having loads of the ball doesn't mean that you deserve to win a football match. Not in isolation anyway. Like, having a lot of the ball gives you a greater chance of winning the football match. You can't score when you don't have the ball. So the more possession you have, the more likely you are to score. I accept that. But this idea that us having loads and loads and loads of the ball means that we absolutely, undoubtedly should win the game is wrong. And we've seen that theory disproven in football so many times in recent years. I don't know why we keep falling into that trap. We had 66% of the ball, right, away at Fulham. That's really, really high. We managed during the game 12 shots at Bernd Leno's goal, but only 4 of them were on target. 1 in 3 was on target. Is that 1 in 3? 4, 8, 12. 1 in 3 was on target. My maths is terrible, clearly. Now you look at Fulham, who had 2 shots in the entire game, both of which were on target. One found the back of the net. Football can go like that. They had half the amount of shots that we had on target, but we had 6 times the number of shots that they did overall. So the point I'm trying to make here is that possession and number of shots don't mean anything if you don't make anything of them. And people like to hide behind this, well, we were dominant thing to justify, the fact that, well, the performance was good enough. No, it wasn't, because the performance is all encompassing. When you talk about performance, you talk about every element of it. Your ability to keep possession, your ability to win the ball back, how good you are defensively, how efficient you are in both boxes. All of those things come under the umbrella of performance. And so to dismiss so many of those factors and say, well, we had loads of the ball and we had way more shots than them, therefore it just wasn't our day, is letting the team get away scot-free. And I don't like that. Accountability is really, really important. If you want to go on and win the biggest trophies, the biggest prizes, compete at the top end of the toughest competitions in the world, you need to be efficient. And we've got zero efficiency right now in that final third. You could argue that we've got less efficiency at the back as well, because, as I said, Fulham had 2 shots and they beat us. They drew with us. It feels like they beat us because of how deflating this result is. But the point I'm trying to make here is that I get frustrated when the analysis is really, really binary. It's either we were crap, we were terrible. No, elements of our performance were good. The control element was good, but we lacked efficiency. But I also get equally frustrated when people say, no, it was all terrible, blah, blah, blah. No, it's got to be more nuanced than that, okay? The performance for me, and I said this on the match day reaction pod yesterday, was sort of like, I don't know, 70% of the way there. We did 70% of the job. 70% of the things that we needed to do, we did them. We ticked those boxes. But we did not provide what we needed to in the final third, ultimately, to go on and win the game. And I was probably leaning more towards the side of, well, we were really dominant and it just wasn't our day when I got home from the game yesterday. But when I watched it back, I watched it and I thought, all right, you're watching it and you know what's going to happen, right? So it's difficult to get emotional. But I just watched it and I felt nothing. Like normally when I watch a game back for the first time, even though I know what's coming, I still get quite into it and I still get quite wound up or frustrated by misses, or I'm still in awe of all the brilliant things that I get to see. But this time I didn't feel that way. This time I looked at it and I thought, you know what, we didn't do enough to win this game. And if we're going to keep hiding behind having lots of possession and calling ourselves dominant, then we're not going to improve what we need to improve so that we can try and make a fight of this title race. I am concerned right now. I am worried. We're not packing enough of a punch. Odegaard's return obviously gave us that boost, and we scored a lot of goals in recent weeks. But at Fulham, difficult place to go. Granted, we weren't at it. And if we can get back on the sort of right track immediately, then I'm going to look back at this one and say it was a one-off. I looked at the game at Fulham last season and I felt that was a one-off. We played really poorly after taking the lead and we ended up losing the game. It was a one-off. Ultimately, it proved costly come the end of the season. But you put it down to a one-off because we then went on an incredible run after that. You need to show everybody, Arsenal, that this was a one-off. But a lot of the issues that we saw yesterday, we've seen them multiple times already this season. And that's where the concern comes from. That's why fans are struggling. That's why fans are stressed out about it. Those are my kind of thoughts on the game, on yesterday's performance at Craven Cottage. I just want to jump over to the socials because I got a few replies on X and on what's the other one called again? Blue Sky. When I asked what people wanted me to talk about, forwards was something that came up regularly. We touched on that. John says, please talk about how we dominated the entire match. And he wants to talk about the fine margins in football. He says we're decimated at the back, which is a problem. I've basically covered all of that, man. But this thing dominant, yeah, we dominated possession. Did we do much else? Did that possession amount to what it should have amounted to? Cole says square pegs in round holes don't work. I agree with that. I didn't like the way that we shuffled the pack as much. Lots of you highlighting and making the point that we need a striker. That's a common opinion that's been doing the rounds for a little while. I'm not surprised to read that. And a lot of people commenting on the decision to play Timber over on the left-hand side. I think it's clear, isn't it, that he's far more effective when he plays on the right. If I just go over to Blue Sky and just see what some of the common themes were there. Els says, how much of a discrepancy is there between, well, I guess what you're saying is how much of a golfing class is there between Bukayo Saka and our other attackers? Any priorities needed for future squad building? The gap between them right now is huge. Saka's the only one, as I've said, that you can rely on week in, week out. And that puts a massive burden on him. Is he good enough to carry that burden? He absolutely is. But when teams do what Fulham did yesterday, which is do a shutdown job on him and that entire right-hand side, you need to find another solution. And unfortunately, nobody else across that forward line is playing well enough for them to be our main focal point, for them to be our main route through, if you like. And that's causing us all sorts of issues. Thank you so much for joining me on today's pod. Apologies, it's a pre-recorded one. The reason is is because my wife was called somewhere urgently this morning, which means I'm looking after my little girl. She's 3 years old. And for 35 minutes, she has been good as gold. She's watching Peter Pan. You might have heard her sort of mumbling to herself or singing along with one of the songs at the early part of the podcast. If you did, apologies. But to be fair, considering that I've asked her to sit down and essentially watch TV and not make a peep for half an hour, and she's 3 years old and quite lively, I'm quite pleased with that. So I'm going to quit while I'm ahead. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the pod, and I'll see you all on the next one. Plenty of content to come this week. Check us out on Patreon if you want to as well. And yeah, hopefully we can get back on track when we take to the field in Europe on Wednesday. Until then, take care of yourselves. Goodbye.